I am Avery Lane, 33 years old, a compliance systems specialist and former fraud investigator at the National Integrity Bank. I never planned to become the kind of person who built systems complex enough to make an entire corporation tread carefully. But life rarely asks anyone before it changes their direction. I left the bank after an incident I never want to revisit, a case I uncovered myself, only to be blamed for it, pushed aside, and stripped of every ounce of credit. That experience taught me one truth. In the corporate world, truth is never strong enough unless it comes with power. I walked away from everything and moved to Seattle. The fog and the cold mornings that cut against the skin gave me the quiet I needed. I lived in a small apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. The lights reflecting on the water each night reminded me that the world still followed its rules, even if people did not. I preferred working remotely. I never cared for in person meetings or hallway small talk. I belonged in quiet spaces where I could hear the hum of a machine more clearly than the sound of someone's voice. I did not look for a job. The job found me. Elias Ward, Chief Risk Officer of Nexora Capital Systems, reached out after reading a system analysis I once posted on a security forum. Elias was more than 10 years older than me, sharp enough to make me feel like he could read layers of logic before I even wrote them. He said Nexora needed a compliance architect untouched by internal politics, someone not tied to any faction, not molded by meeting culture. In other words, they needed an invisible person. I did not love the way he phrased it, but he was right. More importantly, he was transparent. He built the contract between me, Nexora, and with absolute clarity. Ownership, responsibilities, and protocols were all written in detail, leaving no room for anyone to twist anything if something ever went wrong. We agreed that my name would not appear in human resources records or the organizational chart. Distance, we both understood, offered safety for the system and for me. I built SpineGrid for Nexora over 3 years, a three-tier risk monitoring framework capable of detecting any unauthorized interference. I embedded self-governing mechanisms, audit triggers that the system could launch on its own, and a locking layer ensuring that if my credentials were ever revoked improperly, the entire monitoring structure would demand re-verification from partner banks. I did not design it to make anyone's life difficult. I designed it to protect the company from reckless hands and uninformed decisions. SpineGrid ran flawlessly for 3 years. No major failures, no false alerts. Thanks to it, Nexora secured a $30 million credit contract from a national bank, something they had failed to achieve many times before. It became the backbone of their entire compliance structure. What most of the company never knew was that I was the one who built that backbone. But not everyone liked the idea of something so critical being built by someone who appeared on no chart. Chase Dillard, 42 years old, Vice President of Operations, was one of them. I had known of him for a long time, the type who lived for spotlights, always trying to prove he deserved a higher place than the one he had. He once failed in a bid for the Chief Executive Officer position, and ever since he has carried a single obsession: to reclaim his reputation. I had met people like him before at my old company, and I knew exactly how dangerous they became when they believed they finally had power. I never interacted with Chase, but I always sensed his suspicion toward anything he could not control. I did not work inside the Nexora building, but I understood its culture. People like Elias were thorns in the eyes of people like Chase, and my existence only sharpened that thorn. Then one afternoon, Elias sent a message. Just 11 words. I am being admitted to the hospital. Heart complications. I knew immediately this was not just about his schedule. It was about Nexora itself. With Elias temporarily out, authority would fall to the next person in the organizational ladder. That person was Chase. I stared at the notification on my screen, sitting silently in my apartment overlooking the darkening water of Elliott Bay, thinking only one thing: a storm was coming. I had seen people like Chase before, and nothing ever ended well for those standing in the wrong place when the storm arrived. I sat there for a long moment, watching faint circles of light ripple across the water outside my window. Maybe you are listening to this story from a quiet place yourself. If you are, tell me where you are listening from, so I can picture the corners of the world this journey is reaching. And if you enjoy stories about intelligent silence, about how an ordinary person can shift an entire system using nothing but logic and principle, stay with me. Because what happened after Elias stepped away was only the beginning. Ever since Elias was hospitalized, the atmosphere at Nexora shifted faster than an outdated system receiving a forced update. I was not in the headquarters, but I could sense the change through every stream of data, every rhythm inside the system, and every unnecessary meeting I was carbon copied into just for procedure. Only a few days after Elias stepped away, Chase Dillard began what he called a cycle of non-transparent cost and personnel optimization, a campaign wrapped in language that sounded progressive, but was really nothing more than his way of positioning himself in front of the board. Chase had never been the kind of man who left anything outside his reach. When Elias was around, Chase at least pretended to be measured. But when temporary authority fell into his hands, he treated it as an opportunity to rewrite the internal structure in the way he believed made sense. He began reviewing every shadow contract, every side agreement, every system access key. A long list appeared on his desk, and he moved through it like someone selecting who would be removed from a power game he believed he owned. Then my credentials appeared before him. Or more accurately, what did not appear. My name was not in human resources. All Chase saw was a credential with deep system access far beyond what a typical contractor should ever receive. No employee identification, no profile photo, no internal tax number, no human resources data. To Chase, this was not the strategic design Elias had intended. It was a vulnerability, something that challenged his authority. And for people like Chase, anything they do not understand is a threat. Anything they cannot control is something they want to eliminate. From that moment, my existence became a hallway rumor inside Nexora. Some mid-level leaders were annoyed because they had heard my name in project calls but had never seen my face. They whispered about why a system as critical as SpineGrid was built by someone who did not even scan a fingerprint at the office entrance. Others stayed silent, not out of respect, but because they knew Elias was not someone easily undermined. Touching anything he built was like reaching into a nest of fire ants. Those small murmurs, those quiet shifts, made the internal atmosphere heavier. Chase saw an opportunity to assert dominance, and he seized it with both hands, as if afraid the spotlight would disappear before he could step into it. Chase launched what he called extreme transparency. Every contractor had to submit weekly detailed reports, not regular reports, but full KPI tables, roadmaps, progress dashboards, and self-evaluations. It sounded like enhanced governance, but everyone understood it was simply a new kind of competency test. Fail it, and you are tagged as non-transparent. And once tagged, your exit was only a matter of time. But when it was my turn, human resources had no file to send the order to. Chase treated that as proof of his suspicion. I could picture him in his office, wearing that satisfied expression as he asked the question he believed revealed my weakness. If she has no record, does she even have legitimate access? A simple question layered with condescension and an unspoken decision already forming in his mind. No one warned me. No one reached out. The silence surrounding me was not protection. It was simply the result of my absence in the physical and political landscape of the company. I knew I had no allies. I also did not need them. What I had was the instinct of someone who had been hurt before and had no intention of repeating history. I reopened every old document, reviewed every layer of logic in SpineGrid, and confirmed that all defensive mechanisms remained intact. I organized every piece of evidence, every contract, every activity log, so that if something happened, I would not become the scapegoat the way I once had. Then the email from Chase arrived, short, cold, and written with the emotional warmth of an automated script. Your access will be reviewed and adjusted. No greeting, no acknowledgement, no professional signature. Just an order, enough to signal that Chase no longer saw me as a contributor, but as an obstacle to be dealt with. I read the email 3 times. I did not feel anger or panic. I felt something familiar. The silence of a company. And I knew that silence had never been a good sign. Chase believed he had found Elias's weakness, that he was finally close to removing someone who did not fit into his system. But what he did not know was that I had never belonged to any side. I belonged only to the process, and SpineGrid did as well. The system did not stand with people, it stood with what was correct. And if Chase continued down the path, I suspected he would soon collide with something he did not understand, something that did not bend, a storm without a face, a force that carried only the imprint of the very system he believed he controlled. That morning, I arrived at Nexora headquarters 10 minutes earlier than the scheduled time. I never liked being there. The high-rise office space of Nexora always felt designed to remind people how small they were. Tall glass, high ceilings, cold light, everything so clean it bordered on sterile. I went straight to floor 26, where Chase had placed his office like a monument to his status. The glass door outside the meeting room was partly frosted, the top part clear enough for people outside to see the light, but not the expressions inside. I stood at the door at exactly 8:29. Chase was already seated, wearing a white shirt pressed too flat, a dark tie that contrasted sharply with a face empty of emotion. To his right was Hayden, a member of the legal team whose name I had seen in a few internal documents. Hayden sat still with a small notebook in front of him, neither friendly nor hostile, just quietly observing. Chase did not stand when I walked in. He looked at me with the kind of suspicion you give a malware signature that appeared in your network with no known origin. "You arrived on time," Chase said, his voice dry, as if he were opening an interrogation rather than a work meeting. I sat in the chair across from him, kept my back straight, hands on the table, not defensive, not soft, just ready. "We are going to clarify a few things," Chase said. "I believe you know why. I knew very well." But I did not answer the question he wanted. I simply said, "I am here at your request." Chase did not like that. The corner of his mouth tightened, the way someone reacts when they must swallow irritation. He opened a folder on the table, flipped through several pages, then stopped at the exact spot he believed would deliver the greatest impact. "I reviewed your access history." He began with the tone of a mid-level manager who pretends to control everything by questioning those who work better than they does. "You have access privileges that no contractor should ever have. I want to know who authorized that." I kept my voice calm. "The Chief Risk Officer, Elias Ward." Chase lifted his chin as if I had just confirmed a crime. "That is the problem," he said. "Elias is no longer here, and I do not appreciate dangerous leftovers from his time." I looked straight into Chase's eyes. I did not respond because anything I said would be twisted into something against me. Chase wanted me to justify myself, to talk more than necessary so he could find a foothold. I was not going to give him that. My silence irritated him more than any argument could. He inhaled sharply, then slammed the folder onto the table to assert dominance. "Do you know what made me question this?" he said slowly. "In our system, you are a ghost. No human resources record, no data, no identification, no photo, no trace. You exist where you should not exist. Do you think I will allow that to continue?" I simply replied, "I work according to the contract I signed." Chase let out a short, cold laugh, one without respect. "What contract?" I did not see any contract. I knew he was lying. Chase could not have missed the contract. He simply disliked that the contract had Elias's signature on it. But I showed no reaction, which irritated him even more. Hayden continued taking notes but did not enter the conversation. His silence made the room heavier, as if he had been brought in to witness a verdict already decided. Chase leaned back in his chair and spoke in a tone that suggested he had reached an unchangeable conclusion. "I cannot allow a non-transparent element inside the core compliance architecture of this company, which is why I prepared this." He opened a drawer, pulled out a pale yellow folder, and from it took a printed document. He placed it in front of me. A memo. One glance was enough to understand. Immediate termination of collaboration. But the most notable line was the instruction: delete all data related to Nexora from your personal device. Chase said it as if it were a standard part of the offboarding procedure, but I knew better than anyone in that room that this sentence was the most dangerous thing he could have signed without understanding the consequences. I looked at the memo for a few seconds. Not rushed, not resisting. Then I said, "I need the original with the signature." Chase handed it to me instantly. No hesitation. His confidence was evident in every movement. In his mind, this meeting was already over. He believed he had eliminated a ghost from the system and reclaimed control he thought should have always been his. I placed the memo into my document folder and stood up. Hayden looked up at me for the first time during the meeting, his expression unreadable. That only made the atmosphere more opaque. As I stepped out of the room, I felt something Chase could not see. The compliance trap had been triggered. Not by me, but by Chase's signature in the lower corner of the paper he had been so confident in giving me. And like any system facing an invalid command, the response would come. Without mercy, without delay, without bias. Meanwhile, Chase sat in that same room, satisfied with the thought that he had erased a ghost. But what he did not know was that he was the one who had just touched the most dangerous point inside SpineGrid. I left Nexora headquarters with the memo in my bag, walking through the vast lobby as if it no longer belonged to the world I was standing in. No one spoke to me on the way out. The thick carpet under my feet absorbed every sound, making it feel like I had just left a closed court session rather than an internal meeting. Only when the glass doors slid shut behind me did I finally release a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Seattle skies were gray as always, the heavy clouds filtering the light as if it passed through a thin layer of dust. I went straight home without stopping by my usual coffee shop or the market, partly because my mind needed quiet, partly because what had happened in that meeting room was not a personnel decision. It was a system event, and systems do not wait for anyone. When I stepped into my apartment, the familiar sound of the lock closing behind me made it feel as though I had returned from noise to a place I understood best. I placed my bag on the table, opened my laptop, and sat in the same seat by the window overlooking Elliott Bay. The memo from Chase lay in front of me, silent like an innocuous sheet of paper, but I knew that within a few hours, it would become the most important piece of evidence in the entire chain of events. I followed every instruction in the memo. I opened the folder containing all documents, logs, reports, diagrams, and system designs related to Nexora. I selected everything, deleted it, and emptied the trash as well. I removed Nexora's internal tools from my computer, deleted the development environment, deleted the simulations, deleted every module I had built over 3 years. No backups, no duplicates, no shortcuts. If I needed to prove anything later, absolute compliance with the memo would be the strongest shield I had. But I left my credentials intact. I did not deactivate it. I did not change anything. SpineGrid needed to see this action itself. The system needed to confirm that the credential had been removed without a valid offboarding token. I did not intervene. I did not steer anything. I let the system behave exactly as it had been designed to behave. About 18 minutes after I finished wiping my files, the second layer of SpineGrid woke up. I saw it through the intermediate log dashboard I still had permission to view. My credentials abruptly shifted into an undefined state. Not inactive, not disabled, undefined. To a standardized risk monitoring system, that was equivalent to a sign of unauthorized interference. The second layer defense mechanism was activated immediately. First, SpineGrid marked the system as undergoing unusual changes. An amber alert code flashed on the main risk dashboard. A few seconds later, per the contract with the bank, the system sent an automatic ping to their monitoring server. A ping not sent by a human, but executed by the system itself, based on rules approved 3 years earlier. On the bank side, that signal was no small matter. Alerts of that type landed directly in emergency review. The protocol triggered itself without needing human approval. Everything unfolded like a domino chain, emotionless but precise, a structure built to prevent risk, not accommodate human ego. About 30 minutes later, Nexora began to feel the disruption. Several compliance modules are paused. The dashboard shifted from amber to red, signaling critical risk. Data streams at several points became interrupted. Not system errors. SpineGrid was doing exactly what it was meant to do, shutting down segments that could be affected by an improper access change. Meanwhile, Morgan, a young engineer on the integration team, noticed the strange error chain on his screen. He did not have deep access, but he knew enough to understand this was not a typical glitch. Morgan told Chase that the alert appeared to be related to a credential being revoked incorrectly. Chase dismissed it immediately, insisting the system was sometimes too sensitive. I could picture his face in that moment, the confidence of someone who does not understand but thinks he does. Chase ordered the internal team to hit the system again. His exact words made it sound as if he were asking them to fix a photocopier, not a multi-layer compliance architecture. The engineers complied because they had no authority to refuse. They tried restarting modules, tried switching ownership objects, tried adjusting logs. Each action only made SpineGrid respond more aggressively. The defensive layers started to contract as if the system were bracing against an attack. While Nixora scrambled around warnings they could not decipher, I received the first email from the bank. The message was short, but the gravity was unmistakable. We have received a system alert related to your credentials. Please confirm the reason for its removal. No employee sent this email. It came automatically from their credit monitoring system. When a bank asks that question, it means the matter has moved beyond the company's internal control. I looked at the email and stayed silent for a few seconds. The storm had begun. And as I said, I did not trigger it. Chase pulled the trigger himself. And now, SpineGrid was only doing what it had been programmed to do. I was not at Nexora when things began slipping out of Chase's hands, but I knew exactly how people like him reacted. When the first signs of a serious incident appeared, they did not step back to assess. They lunged forward, trying to seize control through aggression, as if their raised voice could make a three-layer compliance system obey them. Chase was no exception. He panicked. And like every panicked man with authority, he hid his fear under exaggerated decisiveness. Only a few hours after SpineGrid warnings spread, Chase gathered an internal group of engineers he considered reliable. 3 people. They met in a small basement tech room where few paid attention. He called the group a name he surely thought was impressive: Shadow Ops. Those 3 engineers were skilled, but none of them had been trained by Elias on SpineGrid. They understood the Surface API. They understood workflow operations, but they did not understand the deeper logic. They did not know SpineGrid was not an ordinary access system. It was a registered compliance monitoring framework tied to the bank and audited regularly. Chase did not want explanations. He told them they were to restore control by any means necessary. Pressure showed on his face even though his voice tried to remain steady. He did not realize he was pushing them into a direct attack on SpineGrid's protective architecture. Shadow Ops began by trying to reassign the credential, a crude method to seize trigger paths instead of letting the system operate autonomously. But SpineGrid was not designed to accept manual reassignment. One improper action was enough to activate the third defensive layer, and that was exactly what happened. The moment Shadow Ops attempted to change ownership of one monitoring stream, the third layer activated. This was the layer I once jokingly compared to the emergency bulkhead closure of a submarine. When the third layer engaged, 2 things happened immediately. First, the system disabled transaction authorization functions. No compliance-related transaction could be processed, even internal ones. Second, every unusual action from Shadow Ops was captured, logged, and sent to 2 places: the bank monitoring system and Nexora Legal. The logs were sent instantly, irreversible, no exceptions. Monroe, the internal attorney, was the first to read the report. I knew Monroe was not someone who reacted emotionally. He spoke slowly, clearly, and only when necessary. But in this situation, he went straight to Chase's office, without warning. "Chase, what are you doing?" I could imagine Monroe saying it, his voice still even, but colder than usual. "You are interfering with a federally certified system. For any rational person, that would have been enough to stop." But Chase was not rational. He brushed Monroe off, insisting everything was under control. Monroe then remained silent. The reaction of someone who understood the legal threshold had been crossed, and he wanted no further involvement. But Chase did not stop. He asked Hayden, the man who had been in the meeting with me the morning before, to sign an official statement declaring that I was not authorized to access SpineGrid. An extremely dangerous document, because if signed, it would be sent to the bank and become a legal admission. Hayden refused. For the first time since the entire situation began, he took a clear stance. Chase changed tone, threatening to reassign him to a less relevant department, but Hayden still refused. A person who truly understood the law would never sign something that could make him commit a federal offense. At the same time, I received another email from the bank. Compared to the previous one, this message was far more explicit. We require the original architect of SpineGrid to confirm system integrity. No more asking for reasons behind credential removal. No more process checks. They wanted system confirmation. And I was the only person who could answer that question. Chase received a copy of the email as well. And that was the moment, though I was not there to witness it, when I knew he finally began to panic for real. To him, the system was still just a tool. He did not understand that when a bank requested verification at that level, it meant they suspected Nexora might be violating credit compliance, a suspicion strong enough to freeze company operations entirely. Chase tried to block the next emails. He told the IT team to temporarily halt incoming mail from the bank domain. But that changed nothing. The bank did not only send emails, it sent alerts through the monitoring API. It pushed signals to third-party compliance dashboards. It transmitted logs through federally encrypted channels. Blocking email only made Chase look desperate, not effective. His condition at that moment, I could picture clearly: a flushed face, short breaths, demanding that engineers fix everything immediately. And the more they attempted to fix, the deeper they dug into protected layers. He still believed he was trying to save the system. In reality, he was the one who had created the entire crisis, step by step, command by command, signature by signature. And I, in my apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, simply watched the signals coming from SpineGrid. The system was not wrong. It was doing exactly what I designed it to do. And what I designed would never bend to the recklessness of someone who did not understand it. Chase had not yet realized that simple truth. But he would soon, because the storm had not reached its peak. And what was approaching was not a system failure, it was a consequence. I had not yet replied to the email from the bank when the first alert from the Nexora internal monitoring system appeared. An unusually long log sequence showed a new user logging into SpineGrid. The line that followed made me sit still for a few seconds. The credentials of Elias Ward had just been reactivated. I checked the time, slightly after 8 in the morning. Elias was never someone who left a crisis unattended for more than 3 hours. But I did not think he would return this soon, especially after a heart treatment. His appearance at this moment meant the situation had already passed every boundary the internal teams could handle. About 10 minutes later, I received a short message from a risk team engineer. Only one sentence. He is here. Elias had arrived without warning. He walked into the building at 8:03, thinner, paler, eyes hollowed like someone who had stepped out of another kind of battle. But his gaze was still sharp, the gaze of a man who understood his system better than anyone and knew exactly what it was signaling. He went straight to the risk control floor without greeting anyone. They said he looked at the dashboard once, and his expression changed immediately. The meeting room doors opened right after. Elias ordered an emergency gathering of every relevant party, legal, technical, and of course, Chase. The meeting took place in the largest operations room on the floor. I was not there, but what happened was retold by multiple sources, and I could imagine every detail with unsettling accuracy, because I knew each person involved, and I understood the system they were staring at. When Chase entered the room, Elias did not invite him to sit. He stood at one side of the table, one hand on the surface as if holding back anger. "Explain," Elias said clearly. "What did you do to the system?" Chase reacted with his usual self-defense instinct. He blamed me. He claimed I had been a transparency risk. He said I was the flaw Elias created. He argued that terminating my role was necessary to protect the company. He kept talking until Elias cut him off. "I am not asking about Avery," Elias said. "I am asking what you did." Monroe stood against the wall, watching sharply like a researcher examining a pathological specimen. He knew this meeting was not just internal accountability. It could become evidence if the matter reached the federal level. Elias signaled the technical team to display the log on the main screen. Thousands of lines appeared, but he pointed to only 3 segments. First, he pointed at the log showing Chase's signature on the memo from the previous morning. A direct, undeniable confirmation. "You sign this." Then he pointed at the second log. The entry marked my credentials as removed without a valid offboarding token. You ordered a process violation, Elias said. The system reacted exactly as designed. Finally, he scrolled to the third segment, a long chain of alerts showing unauthorized interference from the Shadow Ops group, tagged with 3 internal engineer identifiers. And the group you commanded caused the cascading failure. The room fell silent. The sound of the air conditioner was as clear as a whistle. Chase had nowhere to dodge, nothing to twist. Logs do not lie. Monroe stepped forward, speaking quietly but firmly. We are on the edge of a federal violation. If the bank views this as intentional misconduct or a governance failure, the consequences will be more severe than just frozen credit. It could mean investigation. Chase opened his mouth to protest, but Elias cut him off. Enough. I have already reported to the bank that we will restore the system immediately with support from Avery Lane. The room tightened like a pulled string. Chase reacted exactly as expected. No. Avery set this trap from the beginning. This is her fault. She is trying to sabotage us. Elias's eyes hardened, a look sharp enough to crush any defense. The trap activates only when someone tries to break the system. She did not do that. You did. No one spoke. Hayden stared at the table, hands gripping his pen. Monroe straightened, having chosen his stance. The technical team remained silent, fully understanding the weight of every log displayed. Elias did not need to raise his voice. He turned toward the system security lead and gave one order: revoke all access for Mr. Dillard. Immediately. Chase froze. No time to argue, no chance to yell. He stood as if someone had unplugged him. Nexora Security executed the command with almost brutal efficiency. His access, tokens, and system identifiers vanished one by one. A chain of red logs appeared like a final punctuation mark. When the meeting ended, Elias said one last sentence, a sentence that many would later recall as one of the sharpest moments in Nexora history. The system is not wrong. It only does what we programmed it to do. The problem is that the person tried to force their will against the process. On the floor below, where the dashboard was still flashing red, I watched Chase's credentials disappear from SpineGrid in real time. An inevitable ending. One he had activated with his own hand. SpineGrid had stabilized in a defensive lockdown state, but for the system to come fully back online, one person had to touch it. Not the internal engineers. Not legal. Not Chase. And Elias knew that before anyone in Nexora even opened their mouth. Only 10 minutes after the emergency meeting, I received an encrypted message from Elias. Brief, precise, exactly his style. Your support is required. Temporary credential issued. Below it was a one-time token, the kind of access rarely activated. It did not give me full authority like before, but it gave me exactly what I needed. Full system read mode and a limited restoration channel. Read only, but restore capable. It was like handing me a key that unlocked only one door, but behind that door was the entire control room. I exhaled, opened the terminal, and entered the token. Authentication ran for a few seconds. Then SpineGrid opened. The moment I logged in, I saw something only the system architect would recognize. SpineGrid recognized me. Not in a human sense, but in the way a logic framework detects the signature of its original designer. Amber alerts shifted to pale yellow. Several processes downgraded their threat level from critical to warning active. It was not magic. It was the mechanism I had built. The system reduced its defensive posture when the correct architect appeared. On the screen, I opened the full technical log. Thousands of lines ran like heartbeats. I read each block, each timestamp, each event code. I saw exactly where Shadow Ops had interfered. They had attempted to reassign a monitoring stream without triggering the second-tier token. That triggered the auto lock, which then caused the third layer to contract and shut down all transactions. I extracted the critical log segments. The first 3 timestamps documenting Chase's signature that led to the improper credential removal. The next 12 timestamps show unauthorized Shadow Ops attempts, and the Layer 3 shutdown chain. All of it was enough to serve as evidence in any investigation. But that was not my focus. My job was to stabilize SpineGrid. I switched to the recovery panel. It was still partially locked, but I had built a fallback path for extreme conditions. I ran the first three commands, activating the integrity branch that only someone who understood the core structure would remember. The system moved quickly, like muscles returning to alignment after being pulled the wrong way. For the fourth command, I paused for a breath, not out of doubt, but because I remembered writing it on a rainy night 3 years earlier when Elias had asked what would happen if someone ever tried to sabotage the system. I told him I would build a safe return path that only the correct person could use, but the wrong one could never exploit. I ran the command. The third layer began to retract. Lock processes opened in the exact sequence I wrote. The second layer shifted from red to yellow. Monitoring interfaces flashed stabilizing. One by one, spine grid fell back into its normal rhythm. In 8 minutes, the entire system was restored. No spectacle, no drama, just logic doing what logic should do. As the stability signals settled, a notification appeared from the bank server. An automated credit system message, recovery signal stable, threshold temporarily unlocked. I exhaled, not because I cared for Nixora, but because I cared for the engineers, the staff, the people who had nothing to do with the power struggle Chase created. They did not deserve the fallout. Once the system was stable, I opened the event log and created a new entry. In SpineGrid, a log is not just a record, it is a statement of truth. I wrote a single line. The system is functioning as designed. The only failure is how it was treated. I saved it. The line appeared in the log list, unhighlighted, colorless, but permanent, stamped with my identifier and the restored system state. Then I opened the encryption tool and generated two reports, one for legal, one for the bank. Each was filled with log evidence, analysis of unauthorized shadow ops behavior, and an exact breakdown of what had occurred. No judgment, no accusation, just data. When the reports were sent, I closed my laptop and leaned back, looking out over Elliott Bay. Seattle light had begun to break through, the water calm like glass. Part of me felt lighter. The other part was steady and cold, because I knew, and Elias knew, that this was not the end. The system had returned, but the people had not. The next morning, while I was making coffee, an email from the bank appeared on my phone. No longer an automated alert. This time, it was an official letter, clearly reviewed by 3 different departments. The notice stated plainly that the failure was not in SpineGrid, not in the system architecture, not in the integration process, but in non-compliant actions performed by the Vice President of Operations, Mr. Chase Dillard. The bank did not use accusatory language. They did not need to. In their vocabulary, the phrase non-compliant actions was equivalent to an indictment, and the fact that they mentioned Chase's title meant they were prepared to hold Nixora accountable at the board level. 1 hour later, Nixora convened a crisis management meeting. The room held the entire executive team, legal, internal audit, and several senior leaders. Elias sat at the head of the table, still thin, still pale, but the weight of his presence silenced the room of powerful people. Everyone knew this was no longer an internal dispute. It was something that could break Nexora with a single report. Chase entered 2 minutes late. The confidence was gone. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie crooked, and his eyes red as if he had spent the night trying to fix the problem by force. But when the door closed, he still tried to stand straight and speak steadily. I would like to explain. Elias raised a hand to stop him. Chase, before you speak, we will review the data. Monroe stood, placed a folder on the table, and connected his laptop to the large screen. Evidence appeared, one sequence at a time, sharp as blades. First was the memo I held, the original document with Chase's signature. Several people leaned back when they read the line, "Delete all data related to Nexora from your personal device." No further explanation was needed. Anyone in this field knew that it violated every rule of data control. Next came the technical logs from SpineGrid showing my credentials were removed without an offboarding token, a deletion command executed without legal authorization. Core processes forcibly shifted out of their normal state. A wave of murmurs spread around the table. Chase swallowed hard. Elias ordered the Shadow Ops logs next. 3 engineer identifiers appeared, under the glow of the screen. Unauthorized commands flickered like hammer strikes. Anyone could see it was system sabotage, whether they understood the code or not. Then came the last piece, the internal emails Chase had tried to block. The IT team had recovered full records, including the timestamp when Chase instructed them to stop mail from the bank domain. No one reacted loudly, but the silence in that room carried more weight than shouting. Monroe broke the silence. We are facing a violation that can escalate to the federal level. Unauthorized access, breaching protective layers, and interfering with bank monitoring channels cannot be minimized. Chase looked around the table, searching for support. No one looked back. He began to thrash for justification. Avery built the system so no one else could control it. She did it to hold power. No one can access anything without going through her. She is the problem. If the system were not so rigid, we would not be here. Monroe let out a soft laugh, cold and sharp. That is not control, Mr. Dillard. That is protection from people who do not understand the system but attempt to break it with their bare hands. The words hit the table like a stone thrown into still water. No one argued. The logs were too clear. Chase was not finished. She intentionally built a mechanism that locks the system when her credential is removed. Like a trap. This is a company system, not hers. She had no right. Elias stood, cutting him off with a low and precise voice. The trap activates only when someone tries to break the system. And that person was not Avery. It was you. Chase froze for several seconds, then looked desperately toward each board member. But no one stood with him. No justification could rewrite what had been captured in the logs. Elias turned to the head of system security. Suspend all access for Mr. Dillard, immediately. The security director nodded. It took 4 seconds. 4 seconds for the Chase account to vanish, his tokens invalidated, his access revoked, and the system logging his final status under his identifier. Suspended. Chase did not explode in anger as I once expected. No shouting, no slamming the table. He stood still, as if every tense wire inside him had been cut at once. When 2 security staff appeared at the door, he looked down and followed them without a word. The hallway at Nexora was bright and long, but his footsteps were heavy. A few employees stood along the sides, some surprised, some sympathetic, most quietly relieved. All of us knew how dangerous unchecked authority could be when placed in the wrong hands, and we had just witnessed the consequence. When the elevator doors closed, I did not feel joy, no triumph, only a quiet realization. People often fall from the very staircase they built, especially when that staircase was held up by arrogance. And Chase had fallen exactly like that. After 2 days of restoration and cross-checking, SpineGrid finally returned to complete equilibrium. No red alerts, no pings from the bank, no remaining anomalies in the core structure. I opened the dashboard one last time, using the temporary credential Elias had provided. The system recognized me with the steady ease of something breathing normally again. No resistance, no tightening. It had returned to what it was designed to be. Silent, precise, and loyal to logic. I prepared the final report, a detailed account of the entire recovery process, the root cause, the corrective steps, and recommendations for improving personnel procedures. Line by line, section by section, I documented everything in a form any audit would understand. No blame, no omission, only truth. When the report was sent to legal, the executive board, and the bank, I returned to the system interface and executed the command to delete my temporary credential. The command ran for a few seconds. When the last token disappeared from the panel, it felt as if I had closed the final door of a room that once held chaos. Only a few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Elias. His voice was rougher than before, but it still carried an effortless authority. Avery, thank you. But more than thank you, I am sorry. It was the first time I had ever heard Elias say those words, not because he was arrogant, but because he was someone who planned meticulously to protect the system from dangerous people. This time, he had let the wrong person get too close to the company's core. I answered simply, "You are not the one who needs to apologize to me." There was a long pause. Then Elias spoke again. Nexora owes you more than gratitude, and we would like to make things right by offering you a long-term contract. The compensation will reflect the role you have proven. No one in this company doubts your value anymore. I looked out the window. The Seattle sky was pale blue, the light filtering through thin mist, reflected on the surface of Elliott Bay. A rare calm after days of turbulence. I spoke slowly. I appreciate the offer, Elias, but I do not belong in places that treat silence as a space to exploit. There was no anger in what I said, no bitterness, only a conclusion. A truth I had learned at a steep cost at my previous company, and again here at Nixora. Elias sighed on the other end. I understand. You deserve a better place. The call ended. I set the phone down, grabbed my coat, and stepped out of the apartment, not to escape what had happened, but to find something I had lost years ago: ease. I walked along the path by Elliott Bay. Small waves tapped against the rocks, the sound of water against concrete reminding me of the steady rhythm of logic I always trusted. The wind carried a faint salt scent. The sky was not bright, but it was enough to quiet the mind. I had lived too long with the constant need to guard myself, to prove myself, to brace against people who believed they had the right to tamper with my work through ignorance. But this time, what I felt was not anger, not triumph, it was peace. As I watched the water, my phone buzzed again. A new number. I answered. The woman on the line spoke with a low, steady, professional voice. She introduced herself as a representative from the National Risk Oversight Division of the bank. Not a branch, not a credit team. A central authority overseeing the largest systems in the financial sector. We have reviewed your report, she said, and we would like to discuss with you an important position, a role that requires analytical skill, system design capability, and especially the ability to keep a system standing firm against people who break it without understanding what they are breaking. It was the kind of invitation that many people chase their entire careers, but I did not answer immediately. I looked out at the water, the wind pushing small waves toward the shore, and I smiled. Not because I thought I had won, but because I knew I had reclaimed my own voice, the one I had lost long ago. I did not need a spotlight. I did not need to shout to be recognized. I only needed to do my work correctly and let the system speak for me when necessary. I answered her. I will think about it, she replied. We look forward to hearing from you soon. When the call ended, I stood still for a moment. No more arguments, no more error alerts, only the sound of waves and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. In the corporate world, silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the most important line of code in the entire system, and I had finally rewritten it on my own terms.